I had been planning that camping trip for weeks. I needed a break from everything. Work had been draining me. The noise of the city had become too much, and my head felt like it was always full of static. I just wanted silence for a few days, somewhere far away from traffic, screens, and people. I found a spot on an old map of public land that I'd never been to before, about 4 hours north of where I lived. It wasn't an official campsite, just a patch of forest marked by a few dirt roads and an old fire trail that wasn't maintained anymore. That sounded perfect to me. I packed light but smart, my small tent, sleeping bag, stove, flashlight, hatchet, food for 3 days, and a few other basics. I wanted to keep it simple. I left early in the morning, just before sunrise. The drive started out calm and steady, the highway empty at that hour. But as I turned off onto smaller roads, things got more isolated. I passed small clusters of old houses, then nothing but open fields and lines of trees. The sky stayed gray most of the drive, heavy clouds hanging low, like it might rain but couldn't decide when. When I reached the dirt road that led into the woods, it felt like I was leaving everything behind. The road was uneven, covered in loose gravel, and wound through thick pines that got denser as I went farther in. My tires crunched quietly on the gravel, and every now and then I saw movement in the trees. A bird taking off, maybe a deer running deeper into the brush. It was peaceful, but there was also something about the stillness that made me feel watched, even though I knew it was just me and the woods. I parked my truck at a wide clearing where the dirt road faded into a narrow trail. I checked my GPS, marked my location, and loaded my pack. I figured I'd hike another mile or two into the forest to find a more hidden place to set up my tent. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. The air felt heavy, damp. I could smell the wet earth and pine sap. There was a steady sound of distant running water somewhere to my left, maybe a creek or small river. I thought it would be good to camp close enough to that for washing and cooking, but not too close in case of flooding. After hiking for about an hour, I found a spot that seemed perfect. It was a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, with enough flat ground to set up my tent, and about 100 feet from that creek I'd heard earlier. The creek itself was narrow but moving fast, cold and clear. The banks were lined with moss and ferns. I dropped my backpack, stretched, and stood there for a while just listening. Nothing but the soft rush of water and the occasional bird call. That's exactly what I'd come for. I set up camp carefully, like I always did. Tent first, then sleeping bag. Then I cleared a small spot for my stove. I hung my food bag from a high branch a few yards away in case of raccoons or bears. I even made a small ring of stones for a campfire later that night. Everything looked perfect by the time I was done, and the air was starting to cool a little. I sat on a fallen log, ate a protein bar, and just looked around at the trees. There was a strange comfort in being alone like that. It reminded me how quiet the world could be when there wasn't anyone else around. The first sign that something was off came when I went down to the creek to collect water. I followed the bank a bit, maybe 100 feet upstream, where the water widened slightly. I crouched down to fill my bottle with my filter, and that's when I noticed a set of boot prints in the soft mud across the creek. Not mine, they were older, maybe a few days, but they didn't look like hiker boots. The pattern was flat, worn, maybe work boots or something heavier. That wouldn't have been strange if this had been a public camping area, but I was miles from any marked trails. I figured it could be a hunter or some other camper who came through recently, so I didn't think too much of it at first. Still, I remember looking across that narrow creek and feeling a small, uneasy thought cross my mind. If someone had been here before me, where were they camping? I went back to camp and tried to shake it off. I spent the afternoon gathering some dry branches for a small fire. The weather was cool enough that I wanted it mostly for warmth. I cooked a simple meal, just rice and canned beans, and sat by the fire until it started to get dark. The sky went from gray to deep blue, then to black. There were no stars that night, just clouds blocking everything out. I remember how dark it got, darker than I expected. The forest at night has a way of swallowing every bit of light. Even my fire seemed weak against it. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the sounds, distant cracking branches, the quiet rush of the creek, the wind pushing through the trees. I went to bed early, probably around 9. I woke up once in the middle of the night. I don't know what time it was, but the fire had burned out completely, and the woods were dead silent. That kind of silence is strange. You don't even hear crickets or wind. It's like everything is holding its breath. I lay still for a while, trying to figure out if I'd heard something that woke me up. My tent was cold, and the ground felt harder than I remembered. I didn't hear anything else, though, so after a few minutes I drifted back to sleep. The next morning was cloudy again, and colder. I made some coffee and walked down to the creek again. That's when I noticed something new. There were fresh boot prints near the water, on my side this time. They were faint, like someone had stepped lightly, but they were definitely new. The soil was damp from the night air, and these prints hadn't been there the day before. I knelt down and looked closer. The tread was the same as the ones I'd seen across the creek earlier. Same flat pattern, same size. I looked around but didn't see anyone. I told myself it could have been an animal and my mind was playing tricks. But I knew what I saw. They were human prints. I walked a bit farther upstream, following them for maybe 20 feet until they stopped near a cluster of bushes. That's where things got strange. Behind the bushes, hidden between two trees, there was a small pile of things. Random stuff that didn't belong there. A broken metal cup, an old lighter, and a torn piece of blue tarp half buried under leaves. It looked like someone had been staying there, or at least passing through and leaving things behind. I turned the lighter over, it still worked. That unsettled me more than anything else. It meant someone had been there recently. I started to wonder if they'd been around while I was asleep. I went back to my camp and checked my gear. Everything was still there. Tent untouched, food bag hanging where I left it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I tried to calm myself down by going for a hike. I followed a narrow game trail that went deeper into the woods, hoping to find some open area or maybe a sign that someone else had a camp nearby. The farther I went, the more uneasy I felt. The forest started to look all the same. Dense trees, soft ground covered in pine needles, no clear direction. After about a mile, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There were tree branches tied together with pieces of rope, forming a kind of crude frame, not natural, not random. Someone had made it. It looked like a simple structure, like the start of a shelter or maybe a lean-to. The rope looked old, weathered, but the ground around it was disturbed, with footprints and signs of movement. Whoever had been there wasn't just passing through. They had spent time here. I didn't go any farther. I turned back and followed my GPS carefully to make sure I didn't get lost. When I got back to my campsite, I felt this strange heaviness in my chest. I kept scanning the trees, half expecting to see someone standing there. I decided I'd stay one more night and leave in the morning. It wasn't fear exactly, but I didn't like the idea of being deep in the woods when someone else clearly used the same area. That night, I built another fire early, trying to keep my mind calm. I ate, cleaned up, and sat by the fire until it started getting dark again. The forest sounds came alive for a while. Insects, frogs near the creek, then faded again as the temperature dropped. I checked my flashlight batteries, made sure my hatchet was close, and crawled into the tent. It took a while to fall asleep, but when I finally did, it didn't last long. I woke up to a sound that froze me. It was faint but clear, the crunch of footsteps on dry leaves, somewhere near my camp. Slow, deliberate steps. I didn't move. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the dark shape of the tent fabric above me. The sound came closer, then stopped. The silence after that was the worst part. I could hear my own heartbeat. Then another sound, a faint metallic click, like something being dropped or picked up. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to make any noise. After what felt like forever, I heard the footsteps again, moving away this time, fading into the distance. I stayed awake the rest of the night, not daring to move. When daylight finally came, I stepped out of my tent slowly. Everything looked normal at first glance. My fire pit was cold. The food bag was still hanging. Nothing seemed touched. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On the dirt right beside my tent, there were fresh boot prints. The same pattern again. They circled my tent once, then led toward the trees. I followed them with my eyes, and that's when I noticed something else. On the edge of my camp, tied around one of the pines. There was a small piece of red cloth, maybe torn from a shirt. It was tied there like a marker. I hadn't seen it before. That was it for me. I packed everything up as fast as I could. I didn't even make breakfast. Every sound in the forest made me jump. A snapping twig, the rustle of wind in the branches. I loaded my backpack, grabbed my hatchet, and started hiking back toward where I'd parked. The trail looked different in daylight. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind me. Once I reached the clearing where my truck was, I felt a bit of relief, but also something else. Fear that maybe whoever it was had followed me there too. When I reached my truck, I froze again. There were muddy footprints near the driver's side door. Same tread pattern, same size. Whoever it was had been there too. I checked the truck quickly. The doors were still locked, windows intact. But there was something lying on the hood. A small pile of stones, stacked neatly, like someone had left it as a sign. That simple pile felt worse than anything else I'd seen. It meant they'd been close enough to touch my vehicle. It meant they knew I was leaving. I drove out of those woods faster than I should have, the tires slipping on the wet dirt. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone step out of the trees as I drove away. The forest eventually thinned out, and the dirt road turned back into asphalt. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway again. When I finally pulled over at a gas station an hour later, I sat in the truck for a while, just breathing. I couldn't stop thinking about those boot prints circling my tent, the footsteps in the dark, the pile of stones. I thought about the hidden shelter I'd found, the old tarp, the lighter that still worked. Someone had been living out there, watching. Maybe they'd been there for years. I never went back to that area again. I told a ranger about it later, about the signs of someone staying out there, but I didn't mention the nights or the prints around my tent. He said they'd check it out, but I never heard anything after that. Sometimes I wonder if they ever found the shelter or if the person who'd been there moved deeper into the woods. For a long time after that trip, I couldn't sleep properly. Every small sound at night made me wake up and listen. It wasn't the woods themselves that scared me. It was the thought of someone choosing to live out there, hidden, watching anyone who came too close. Someone who didn't want to be found. I realized that when you go deep enough into the wild, you stop being completely alone. Not because of animals, but because of the kind of people who disappear into it and never come back out. I had been planning that camping trip for almost 2 months. The stress from work had built up to a point where I couldn't focus on anything anymore. I wanted to be away from people, away from the noise, somewhere far enough that I wouldn't hear cars, wouldn't see cell towers, wouldn't even think about deadlines or meetings. I picked a place in the mountains that I had only read about online. A remote area with no official campsite, just open land with forested slopes, clear water streams, and not many trails. It was supposed to be a 4-day solo trip, just me, my tent, food, and some gear. I packed light. A small tent, sleeping bag, a portable stove, dried food, water filter, knife, headlamp, a map, and my phone that I didn't expect to get any service anyway. I checked the weather before leaving. Sunny for most of the week, mild wind, no rain expected. Everything looked perfect. I started early in the morning and drove for about 4 hours until I reached the gravel road that led into the forest. The drive itself felt endless. The deeper I went, the less I saw any sign of civilization. After a while, the road turned narrow and rough. It wound through tall pine trees and thick brush, and I had to slow down to avoid hitting rocks and deep ruts. I parked my car at the side of the trail when it became too steep and continued on foot. The air felt crisp and clean. The forest was quiet, with only the faint sound of wind brushing through the trees and the occasional distant bird call. My plan was to hike about 6 miles into the woods to a small lake I saw on the map. It was supposed to be secluded, surrounded by steep hills and dense forest, not easily accessible. I liked the sound of that. I walked for hours with the sound of gravel crunching under my boots, occasionally stopping to take a sip of water or adjust my backpack straps. By the time I reached the lake, the sun was low, shining a soft orange glow across the water. It looked beautiful, still, untouched, surrounded by trees on all sides. I found a small flat area near the edge and set up my tent. The ground was covered with pine needles, soft enough to sleep on. After setting up the tent, I gathered some dry wood and built a small campfire just for light and a bit of warmth. I boiled some water for noodles and sat quietly, watching the last bit of sunlight fade behind the hills. The stillness around me felt strange at first. There were no city sounds, no distant hum of cars, no voices, just forest and the crackle of fire. It felt calming but also slightly uneasy. I wasn't used to being alone that deep in nature. When the darkness fully settled, I put out the fire and crawled into my tent. The night air was cool, and I could hear faint rustling noises from the woods around me, probably small animals moving through leaves. I lay there for a long time, staring up through the thin fabric of the tent, thinking how quiet everything felt. Eventually, I fell asleep. The first night went fine. The second day started normally. I woke up early, made coffee, ate a protein bar, and decided to hike further uphill to see if I could find a good view of the lake from above. I carried only my day pack, leaving my tent and main gear behind. The trail wasn't clear, but I followed the slope and marked a few trees with small broken twigs to help me find my way back. After about 2 hours of climbing, I reached a ridge that overlooked the entire valley. The view was incredible. I could see the lake below, my tiny blue tent near its edge, and miles of forest stretching in every direction. The wind was cold up there, and the silence made everything feel so isolated. I stayed there for a while, just sitting on a rock, eating a snack and taking it all in. When I decided to head back down, I noticed something odd. From that height, as I looked back toward the lake, I thought I saw a small figure near the water. It was far away, barely visible, but it looked like a person standing near the shore. I squinted, thinking maybe it was my imagination or a tree shadow, but the shape seemed too defined. I even thought maybe it was a fisherman or another hiker, but this place was far from any official trail. I started back down quickly, feeling slightly unsettled. When I reached my campsite again, there was no one there. The water was still, and everything looked exactly as I left it. I checked my tent and gear, nothing was touched. Maybe I had just imagined it. Still, it left a weird feeling in my gut, like I wasn't completely alone. That evening, I built another small fire and cooked a proper meal. I sat facing the forest, watching the trees sway in the dim light. The longer I sat there, the more I noticed little things. Sounds that didn't seem like animals. A faint crunch of branches somewhere further back. A soft echo of movement that stopped when I looked in that direction. Maybe deer, maybe not. I kept telling myself not to overthink it. As it got darker, I threw the last bit of wood into the fire, letting it burn out. I went inside the tent and zipped it up fully. I lay there with my flashlight in hand, trying to fall asleep. The forest noises continued, faint and irregular. Then I heard something that made my skin tighten. A single sharp sound, like a boot stepping on dry twigs. It wasn't near the tent, but somewhere maybe 20 or 30 feet away. Then silence. No movement, just total stillness. I stayed awake, listening hard. A few minutes passed, and I heard it again, one slow step, then another. It didn't sound like an animal. It was too heavy, too deliberate. My breathing grew shallow. I turned off my flashlight and tried to look through the tent wall, but it was pitch dark. I waited there motionless for what felt like an hour, my hand gripping the knife inside my sleeping bag. Eventually, I heard nothing more. I must have fallen asleep again sometime after midnight, but it was restless, broken sleep. In the morning, I stepped outside and looked around. Nothing seemed out of place. No footprints near the tent, no signs of anyone passing by. I checked the soft ground closer to the tree line and saw a faint depression. Not clear enough to tell, but it could have been a footprint. I tried to tell myself maybe it was just my own from earlier. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that someone might have been nearby last night. I considered packing up and leaving, but part of me didn't want to overreact. I had planned this trip for so long, and everything was probably fine. I decided to stay but move my tent slightly closer to the lake, where the ground was more open and visibility better. I spent most of that day fishing near the shore and trying to relax, though I couldn't fully shake the uneasiness. When the third night came, I set up the fire again but kept it smaller this time. I didn't want it to draw too much attention. The forest was unusually quiet that evening. No birds, no insect hum, just a still silence that made every small sound stand out. As the darkness deepened, I noticed faint movement far beyond the trees, maybe 100 yards away. It looked like someone moving between trunks, slow, almost cautious. I froze, staring at that spot, but the figure disappeared. I couldn't see clearly in the dark, but I knew what I saw. It wasn't an animal. It moved upright, like a person trying not to be seen. That night, I barely slept. Every crack or rustle outside made my chest tighten. At one point, I thought I heard soft footsteps circling around my campsite. Not fast, not close, just pacing around at a distance, as if watching. By dawn, I had made up my mind to leave. I packed my tent quickly, trying to stay calm but efficient. I kept glancing at the woods, half expecting someone to appear. When I hoisted my backpack, I heard something faint, the sound of branches breaking in the same direction I was headed. I paused, waited, and then started moving fast. The woods suddenly didn't feel peaceful anymore. After about half an hour of hiking, I stopped to catch my breath and listened. I heard it again, a soft footstep, far behind me, matching my rhythm. Every time I stopped, the sound stopped too. When I moved, it started again. My heart pounded hard in my chest. I didn't turn around for several minutes, afraid to see what was there. Finally, I forced myself to look back. The forest behind me was still empty, no movement. I kept walking, faster this time, taking the steep trail back toward where I had parked my car. I wanted to believe it was just my nerves, maybe echoes of my own movement, but I couldn't explain why the sound stopped every time I stopped. As I reached the ridge I had crossed on the first day, I turned around once more, and that's when I saw him. A man standing down the slope, maybe 50 yards away. He wasn't moving, just standing between the trees, half hidden in shadows. He wore dark clothing, maybe a jacket and jeans, and his posture was strange. Slightly leaned forward like he was trying to study me. I froze, staring at him, waiting for him to say something or wave, but he didn't. He just stood there. I didn't shout or make any noise. I just turned and started walking again. Faster. I didn't run yet because I didn't want to trigger any kind of chase, but my body was full of adrenaline. I kept checking behind me every few minutes. Sometimes I thought I saw him again through the trees, always at the same distance, like he was following but never getting closer. After an hour of walking, I reached a narrow stream that I had crossed before. The rocks were slippery, and the sound of water masked other noises. When I reached the other side and looked back, I couldn't see him anymore. For a second, I thought maybe I had lost him. I followed the trail downhill, almost jogging now, my legs burning. When I finally reached the area where my car was parked, I almost broke into a sprint. My car was still there, everything inside untouched. I threw my backpack in the back seat and jumped in, starting the engine immediately. My hands were shaking as I turned the key. I looked through the windshield, nothing but trees. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somewhere nearby, maybe watching from the edge of the woods. I drove fast down the gravel road, barely slowing for the sharp turns. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway. Only then did I start to breathe properly again. I looked in the rearview mirror several times, expecting to see a car behind me, but there was nothing. When I got home later that evening, I checked the GPS data from my phone. The location history showed that my phone had pinged a signal at the lake and once on the ridge, but something else caught my eye. There was a short ping about an hour after I fell asleep on the second night that showed movement around my camp. I hadn't moved. My phone was inside the tent. That meant someone had been close enough for it to register. That realization hit me hard. Whoever had been out there wasn't just a hiker passing by. They had been watching me, maybe from the first day I arrived. Maybe they saw my fire from far away and decided to come closer. Maybe they had been moving through that area long before I got there. For the next few weeks, I couldn't sleep properly. Every small sound outside my apartment made me think of the forest again. The crunch of leaves, the slow steps, the figure standing still between the trees. A few days later, I went online and searched for any reports or incidents in that same area. I found one short post on a hiking forum from a guy who said he camped near that same lake 2 months before me. He wrote that he felt watched the whole time and cut his trip short after hearing footsteps outside his tent at night. He didn't see anyone either. That was the last camping trip I ever took alone. Now, whenever I think back to those nights in the woods, I don't remember the beauty of the lake or the silence of the mountains. I remember that still shape standing among the trees, motionless, just watching. And what unsettles me the most isn't what I saw. It's what I'll never know. Who he was, how long he was there, or what might have happened if I hadn't left that morning. Every time I close my eyes, I see that dark shape in the distance, and I realize how easy it would have been for someone to step closer while I slept, and for no one to ever find me after. I decided to go camping alone for the weekend after a long, stressful stretch at work. I wanted quiet, away from traffic, lights, and people. I picked a place far into the forest, somewhere I could only reach by driving along a dirt road for several miles and then hiking in for another couple of miles. It wasn't an official campground, just an open area near a small stream that I had seen once before when hiking. It was peaceful then, and I thought it would be the perfect place to clear my head. The drive took almost 4 hours from my house. Most of it was highway, then it turned into a narrow road that wound through thick trees. The deeper I went, the rougher it got. The pavement ended, and the dirt road was full of potholes and rocks. My car bounced constantly, and branches scraped across the sides as I drove. There was no cell service once I was about 15 minutes down that road. It felt more and more like I was driving away from everything, which was what I wanted. When I finally parked in a small clearing just off the trail, it was around late afternoon. I stepped out of the car and heard nothing but the sound of the forest, wind moving through the trees, the faint trickle of water somewhere nearby, and the distant tapping of woodpeckers. I took a moment to breathe it in. The air smelled like pine and damp leaves. It felt cool compared to the city heat I had left behind. I packed up my camping gear: a small tent, sleeping bag, food, water, and a backpack with basic supplies. The hike to the spot I remembered wasn't long, maybe 30 minutes, but the ground was uneven and covered with fallen branches. I followed the stream most of the way because it was an easy landmark. The water was shallow and clear, sliding gently over smooth stones. When I reached the open space I had in mind, the sun was already beginning to lower behind the trees, casting long shadows. The area was perfect. There was a flat patch of ground for the tent, and the stream curved around one side, making a soft, steady sound that filled the silence. I set up camp slowly, checking everything twice. I pitched my tent a little farther back from the water so morning dew wouldn't soak it, then gathered some wood for a small fire later. Once the tent was up, I sat by the stream for a while, dipping my hands in the cold water and watching tiny fish dart between rocks. It felt peaceful, completely cut off. No cars, no voices, no buzzing phones. Just forest and water. I made a simple meal using my small camp stove. Then, as the light faded, I started a fire. The flames flickered and cracked softly. The warmth felt good as the temperature dropped. When it got dark, I realized just how alone I was. There were no distant lights, no glow from other campers, nothing. The forest around me turned into a wall of black shapes and shifting sounds. The wind moved through the leaves, making them whisper. A few times I heard twigs snap somewhere out there, probably animals moving, but it still made me glance up each time. I wasn't scared, at least not yet, just aware of how empty and wild the place felt. I stayed up until the fire burned down low. The stars were out, sharp and clear above the treetops. When I finally crawled into my tent, I left my flashlight within reach and zipped the entrance closed carefully. The ground was firm but uneven under the sleeping bag. I lay there for a while, listening to the forest settle. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a branch crack loudly, then silence. I told myself it was probably a deer. A few minutes later, there was another sound, closer this time, like someone stepping on dry leaves. I froze, listening. My heart started to pick up. Came again, faint but steady. Crunch, crunch. I sat up, trying not to make noise. The sound seemed to stop when I moved. I waited, staring toward the tent fabric where the faint light of the moon filtered through. After a while, I heard it again, this time farther away. I kept listening until I was sure it wasn't coming closer, then forced myself to lie back down. I was on edge, but exhaustion eventually took over. I woke up before sunrise. The air inside the tent was cold and still. I could see my breath in faint white clouds. Everything outside was quiet except for birds beginning to chirp in the distance. When I stepped out, the ground was damp with dew. My fire pit was cold, just gray ash. I walked a small circle around the campsite, half checking for animal tracks, half checking for peace of mind. Behind my tent, maybe 30 feet away, I saw something that made me stop. There were footprints in the soft dirt, boot prints, not animal. They were faint but clear enough to see the tread pattern. I crouched down and followed them for a few steps. They came from the direction of the woods behind my tent, stopped a few feet away from it, then turned back the way they came. My stomach tightened as I stared at them. Someone had walked right up to my camp during the night. I didn't know what to think. Maybe it was a hiker who passed through, but there wasn't any reason for someone to be this deep in the forest, especially at night. The prints were fresh, the edges not yet crumbled by morning moisture. I walked around the area more, scanning for any other sign. There were none leading to the stream or down the trail, just those behind the tent. For the rest of the morning, I couldn't relax. Every sound made me look up. I kept telling myself not to overthink it, that maybe it was nothing. I went for a short walk along the stream anyway, partly to clear my head, partly to make sure there weren't other campsites nearby. There weren't. I didn't find anyone or anything. When I came back, I decided to stay at least one more night, but I made some changes. I moved the tent slightly closer to the stream, more open ground around it so I could see better. I gathered a bit more wood and kept it ready for a larger fire after dark. The rest of the day passed quietly. I read a book, took photos, and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that kept returning whenever I noticed how quiet it was. By evening, the air grew colder again. I lit a big fire that threw orange light far out into the trees. The smoke drifted slowly upward, and sparks rose with it. I cooked dinner, keeping my flashlight near me. As darkness spread, I sat by the fire trying to focus on the sound of the water and the crackle of the wood. Around midnight, I was still awake. I heard something again, not far. A branch snapped sharply, the kind of break that didn't sound like a small animal. I turned off my headlamp and sat still, letting my eyes adjust. The firelight flickered and moved, casting shifting shadows across the trees. I could feel my pulse beating in my ears. Then came another sound, 2 slow steps. Dry leaves crunching, this time closer than before. The light from the fire caught movement for just a moment, something low and fast moving behind a tree. I thought maybe a deer, but it felt different. I waited, not breathing. Nothing moved again for almost a full minute. Then another branch cracked, farther back. I decided to throw a few more logs onto the fire. The flames jumped higher, lighting more of the surrounding area. I kept scanning the edge of the trees, expecting to see eyes reflecting back, but there was nothing, just the thick darkness between the trunks. I didn't sleep that night. I sat half inside the tent, half watching the fire until morning light started to show. The forest slowly came alive again with the sound of birds. I felt drained, my head heavy from not sleeping. When the sun was fully up, I walked the perimeter again. I found new footprints, clear ones this time, about 20 yards from my campsite. They were heading in the same direction as the others I had seen before. The prints were of boots, same size and tread. They came from deeper in the woods, circled halfway around the camp, and stopped near the stream before turning back. That was enough for me. I didn't care if it was a hunter or someone wandering. It was too strange. I started packing right away. Every few minutes, I looked around to make sure no one was watching. The feeling that someone had been standing out there at night, watching the firelight from the darkness, made the hairs on my arms rise. By the time my gear was packed, I was sweating even though the morning air was cold. I slung my backpack over my shoulders and started down the trail toward my car. The forest felt different on the way out, heavier somehow, quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful anymore. I moved fast, checking behind me often. The path wasn't marked, and I had to keep an eye on the stream as my guide. When I was about halfway back, I saw something that made me stop cold. On a tree trunk beside the trail, someone had carved a small mark, a straight vertical line with 2 short slashes across it. It looked freshly cut, the wood beneath still pale. I looked around, heart pounding, but saw nothing else. I didn't remember seeing that mark on my way in. I started moving faster. The ground was rough and I stumbled more than once, but I didn't care. My only thought was to reach the car. The forest seemed endless, the trees stretching in every direction. When I finally saw the glint of metal from my car through the trees, it felt like relief hitting all at once. But when I got closer, that relief faded. There was mud smeared across the driver's side door, handprints. Someone had touched the car while I was gone. I walked around it slowly, trying to stay calm. There were boot prints in the dirt near the back tires, the same kind of pattern I'd seen near my tent. My heart was hammering as I opened the door. Everything inside looked untouched, but the fact that someone had been there was enough. I started the car immediately. The engine roared louder than usual in the silence of the woods. I pulled out fast, bumping over rocks, barely slowing for turns. My eyes kept flicking to the mirrors, half expecting to see someone step out onto the road behind me. Once I reached the main paved road, I finally began to breathe normally again. I drove until I got cell service and stopped at a gas station. I sat there for a long time in the parking lot, just letting my hands stop shaking. That night, when I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints and the marks on the tree. It wasn't animals. It wasn't random. Someone had followed me out there, had walked up to my tent while I was sleeping, had come back the second night to circle closer, and then gone to my car while I was away from it. For days afterward, I couldn't sleep well. Every noise outside my window made me jump. I went through the photos I had taken at the campsite just to distract myself. In one of them, one I had taken of the stream before sunset, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the far background, between 2 trees, there was a faint shape. It looked like the side of a person, maybe wearing dark clothing, partly hidden by the tree. It was blurred and small, but the outline was there. I hadn't seen anyone while taking that picture. That was the moment it all felt real. It wasn't my imagination. Someone had been there, watching me even before I noticed the sounds at night. I thought about how quiet it had been, how far away from anything, and how easy it would have been for someone to stay hidden. I still go camping sometimes, but never alone anymore. I always go to established campgrounds with other people around. I always make sure there's phone service. That trip taught me something I'll never forget. How easily you can disappear out there without anyone knowing. You can think you're completely alone, but someone could be standing just beyond the firelight, waiting, and you'd never know until it's too late. And even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night in my own house, certain that I can hear slow, careful footsteps just outside the window. I decided to go camping alone in the last week of September, just before the weather turned too cold. I wanted to get away from everything for a few days, clear my head, and spend time in the quiet. I had been working almost non-stop for months and barely left my apartment. I picked a spot I had seen on an old forest map, a decommissioned logging area near the northern foothills, surrounded by deep pine forest. The place was supposed to be remote, rarely visited, and far from the main roads. That was exactly what I wanted. I spent 2 days getting my gear ready. I packed light, a small tent, sleeping bag, cooking gear, food for 3 days, and my old .22 rifle just in case I needed it. I wasn't planning on hunting, but it gave me some comfort having it. I made sure everything fit into my backpack. I checked my map again and marked a route that led off an old gravel road into the woods for about 5 miles. The map showed the remains of a logging trail leading to a flat clearing beside a small creek. That would be my campsite. I left early in the morning. The sky was overcast but calm. The drive out of town took almost 2 hours. The last stretch was rough. Narrow dirt roads lined with thick trees, barely wide enough for one vehicle. I didn't see another car after the first hour. When I finally reached the spot where I had to park and continue on foot, I turned off the engine and just listened. The silence was heavy. No cars, no people, just wind moving through trees and a few distant bird calls. I started hiking with my pack on. The air was cool, the forest damp and dark under the canopy. The logging trail was still faintly visible, 2 ruts with grass growing between them. It looked like no one had used it in years. I followed it deeper into the forest, checking my compass every so often. I passed broken stumps, old tire tracks half buried in dirt, and a rusted piece of machinery covered in moss. The forest swallowed everything, even the faint sound of my boots. After almost 2 hours of hiking, I reached the clearing. It was flat, maybe the size of a basketball court, with a few small trees scattered around. The ground was soft with pine needles. A shallow creek ran along the edge, trickling over rocks. It was quiet, calm, perfect. I dropped my pack and stretched. I set up my tent near the tree line, facing the creek. I gathered some dry branches and built a small fire pit out of stones. By the time I finished setting up, the sun was dropping behind the ridge. The forest began to change. Shadows lengthened, the air cooled, and the sounds of insects filled the space. I cooked a simple meal on my small stove and sat by the fire as the light faded completely. When the forest went dark, it was darker than I remembered from any other camping trip. The trees were tall and thick, and the sky above was just a narrow slit between them. The only light came from my fire and my small lantern. I sat there for a while, listening. The usual forest noises came and went. Crickets, frogs, an occasional rustle in the brush. Nothing unusual. Eventually, I crawled into my tent and fell asleep. I woke up sometime after midnight. I didn't know what woke me at first. The fire had died down to faint red embers outside. Everything was still. I lay there listening. Then I heard it. A slow crunch of leaves, faint but deliberate, coming from somewhere behind my tent. It stopped after a few seconds. My heart started pounding. I thought maybe it was a deer or a raccoon. I waited. Then I heard it again. A few steps this time, moving closer. I reached for my flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent flap just enough to shine it outside. The beam cut through the dark, but I didn't see anything. Just trees and the dim outline of my fire pit. I sat up for almost an hour after that, listening. There were no more sounds. Eventually I convinced myself it was an animal, maybe curious about the smell of food. I fell back asleep but didn't sleep deeply after that. The next morning the forest looked peaceful again. Sunlight filtered through the trees. Mist hung low over the creek. I shook off the unease from the night before and started my day. I made coffee, washed up in the creek, and decided to explore the area a bit. I followed the old trail further north without my pack, just to see where it led. After about half a mile, I came across a pile of old logging debris, rotting planks, rusted nails, and what looked like the frame of an old cabin or shack, mostly collapsed. It was clear no one had used it in decades. I walked around it, taking a few pictures. The woods here were even denser. I didn't go much farther because the trail seemed to vanish into undergrowth. I turned back toward camp. When I returned, I noticed something that made me stop. The small pile of kindling I had left next to the fire pit had been scattered. A few of the sticks were lying several feet away. I thought maybe an animal had messed with it. But then I noticed something else. My folding chair, which I had left upright near the tent, was tipped over. It wasn't windy, and nothing else seemed disturbed. It made me uneasy, but I tried not to overthink it. I set everything back the way it was and ate lunch. The rest of the day was quiet. I spent most of it gathering wood and relaxing by the creek. In the evening, I built a bigger fire and tried to enjoy it. The sky was clear, and the stars came out bright. When I finally went to bed that night, I made sure to secure all my food inside a sealed bag and kept my flashlight close. I fell asleep around midnight. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up again. Not from a noise this time, but from a faint vibration, like a thud in the ground. I froze. Then I heard it again. A single, distant thump, like something heavy landing on soft earth. came from the direction of the old trail. Then silence. A few minutes later, I heard the faint crack of a branch breaking, followed by what sounded like slow footsteps in the underbrush. My heart started racing. It wasn't the quick movement of an animal. It was steady, slow, and deliberate. I switched off my flashlight and just listened. The steps came closer, then stopped again. I stayed absolutely still. I could hear my own breathing inside the tent. The forest outside was dead quiet. I didn't move for what felt like forever. After a long time, there were no more sounds. Eventually, I must have drifted off because when I opened my eyes again, it was morning. Outside, everything looked normal again. The only difference was the feeling, that deep, crawling unease that didn't leave me even in daylight. I walked around the campsite looking for tracks. At first, I didn't see any, but then I noticed faint depressions in the soft dirt near the edge of the clearing. They weren't animal tracks. They were boot prints, old maybe, but they looked fresh enough that they hadn't been there yesterday. That was when I started to get scared. There was no reason for anyone else to be out here. The place wasn't on any maintained trail. The nearest road was miles away. I spent the rest of that day on edge. Every sound made me turn. I debated packing up and leaving, but I told myself I might just be imagining things. Maybe a hunter had passed through. Maybe the tracks were older than I thought. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I didn't wander far from camp that day. When evening came, I built a smaller fire, just enough to keep warm. I ate quickly and tried to stay calm. As it got darker, I noticed something odd. Across the creek, deep between the trees, I saw a faint glimmer, like the reflection of light on metal. I squinted and tried to make sense of it. It disappeared when I moved my head. I thought maybe it was my lantern reflecting on wet bark. But when I turned off my lantern, I could still see a tiny flicker for a moment before it vanished. I stayed awake for a long time that night, sitting near the fire with my rifle across my knees. The forest was silent. I didn't hear anything else until after midnight. Faint crunches again, this time from farther away, like someone circling the clearing slowly. I never saw anyone, but I knew there was something out there. When morning finally came, I made my decision to leave. I packed my tent and gear as quickly as I could. I wanted to be gone before whoever or whatever was out there came back. As I packed, I noticed one more thing. Near the creek, pressed into the damp mud, was another boot print. This one was fresh. The pattern was clear, small rocks still pushed into it. It was from the same direction where I'd seen that faint glimmer the night before. I started hiking back fast, checking behind me every few minutes. The forest was quiet but heavy, like it was listening. I followed the faint logging trail, trying to move quickly but quietly. About halfway to the car, I stopped to rest for a second and drink some water. That's when I heard it, a branch snapping behind me. I turned and scanned the trees, but there was nothing visible. I stood there for several seconds, my pulse pounding. Then I caught movement, a quick flash of something dark between the trees, maybe 100 feet back. It wasn't an animal. The movement was too upright, too human. I didn't wait to find out. I slung my pack tighter and started moving again, faster this time. Every few minutes I glanced back, but the woods looked empty. Still, I felt it, that crawling feeling between my shoulders like eyes on me. When I finally reached the place where my car was parked, I almost ran the last few yards. The car was exactly where I left it, but I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On the side of the driver's door, drawn into the thin layer of dust, were 4 small vertical lines, like someone had run their fingers across it. I didn't waste another second. I threw my pack in, started the engine, and drove. I didn't look back once. The drive out felt endless. Every shadow between the trees made me jump. When I finally reached the main road and cell service returned, I pulled over and just sat there breathing. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. It was like I had dropped off the map for 2 days. For a while after that trip, I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia. Maybe another camper I didn't see, or an old hunter passing through. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. There were no other campsites within miles. The old logging trail didn't connect to any other route. Whoever had been out there knew exactly where I was and stayed far enough away to never be seen clearly. A week later, I finally looked back through the photos I'd taken on my phone. Most were of the forest, the creek, the ruins of the old shack. But one picture made my chest tighten. It was a photo I'd taken near the creek on the first morning. In the background, just barely visible between two trees, was what looked like a figure, faint, blurry, and almost hidden in the shadows. It wasn't close, but it was standing perfectly still, half behind a tree, facing directly toward where I had been standing when I took the picture. I hadn't noticed it then, but it had noticed me, and I'll never know how long it had been there, or how many nights it had been walking the edge of my camp, watching me while I slept. I never thought a simple camping trip could turn into something that would haunt my thoughts for years, not because of ghosts or monsters, but because of how fragile life can feel when you are completely alone in the wilderness. It started with a desire to escape. I had been living in the city for years, surrounded by the noise, the constant motion, and people I didn't really know. I wanted silence. I wanted nature, a tent, a small fire, and nothing else. I planned it for weeks, mapping out a remote trail I had never hiked before. I packed my backpack meticulously. Tent, sleeping bag, extra clothes, stove, food, water, a first aid kit, a flashlight, batteries, and a knife. I thought I was prepared. I was wrong. The trailhead was quiet when I arrived. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. It was early morning, and the sky was a soft gray, with clouds heavy like old wool blankets. I started hiking immediately, feeling the thrill of walking away from civilization. The path was narrow, covered in leaves that had turned a dull brown with the season. There were no other hikers, no cars, just the occasional sound of birds and the wind moving through the trees. The first few hours were peaceful. I felt connected to something primal, something calm. My legs moved steadily, my backpack heavy but balanced, my mind uncluttered for the first time in months. By midday, I reached a small clearing near a stream. The sunlight broke through the clouds in thin beams, catching on the water and making it sparkle. I decided it was the perfect place for lunch. I took off my pack, sat on a fallen log, and ate sandwiches I had made that morning. I drank from the stream after filtering the water, and for a while, everything felt perfect. Then I noticed something. Tracks, footprints in the soft mud near the water, human footprints. They were fresh, no more than a few hours old, leading further down the trail. I didn't see anyone, hear anyone. I told myself it didn't matter. It was a popular trail in parts, and someone must have passed before me. But a tiny seed of unease planted itself in my chest. After lunch, I followed the trail further, the forest growing thicker and darker. The trees were tall, their branches forming a dense canopy that filtered the light. It became quieter as I went on. No birds now, no wind, just my own footsteps. I noticed how every small sound amplified. A snapping twig, a rustle in the underbrush, the distant drip of water from a branch. The forest was alive, but it was not welcoming. My initial excitement started to wane, replaced by a sense of isolation I hadn't expected. I told myself this was normal, that anyone could feel uneasy alone in the woods. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By late afternoon, I needed to find a campsite. I kept an eye out for a flat area to set up my tent. Eventually, I found a spot near a cluster of rocks that overlooked a small ridge. The ground was level enough, and there was firewood nearby. I set up my tent, carefully hammering the stakes into the soil, and organized my supplies inside. The sun was low, the sky a deep orange, and shadows stretched across the clearing. I started a small fire, the crackle of burning wood filling the quiet space. I cooked a simple meal, a can of beans heated over the flame, and ate slowly, savoring the warmth. My senses were heightened now. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow more distinct. The forest had gone from comforting to intimidating in a few hours. Night fell fast. The temperature dropped sharply, and I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, sitting close to the fire to keep warm. The darkness was absolute. The forest swallowed the edges of the clearing, and the firelight barely reached the trees. That's when I heard it. A branch snapping, then another closer this time. I froze, my stomach tightening. I told myself it was probably an animal, deer, raccoon, maybe even a bear. I wasn't worried at first. But then the sounds continued, deliberate and slow, circling the clearing. Something was out there, moving with intent. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed my knife and flashlight, my hands trembling slightly. I scanned the perimeter, but I couldn't see anything beyond the flickering light of the fire. The sounds stopped suddenly, replaced by silence that felt heavier than any noise. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, flashlight ready, fire dying down to embers, listening to every shift in the darkness. Every minute stretched endlessly. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. The forest looked calm, almost beautiful in the daylight. I packed my things quickly and started hiking, keeping to the main trail. But as I walked, I realized something terrifying. The footprints I had seen yesterday were back, fresh, following me. Not ahead, but behind me, keeping pace with my movement. My mind raced. Could it be another hiker? Why would they follow at a distance? Why hadn't I seen them? The thought of confrontation made me nauseous, but the thought of turning back also terrified me. I decided to keep moving forward, trying to reach a main road that was supposed to intersect the trail several miles ahead. Hours passed. I avoided resting too long. Every sound, the cracking of a twig, the rustling of leaves, made me flinch. My legs ached. My shoulders burned from the weight of the pack. My throat was dry. By late afternoon, I reached a stream that cut across the trail. I knew there was a bridge further ahead, but it would take some time to reach. I knelt to refill my water bottle and froze. There it was, a figure, partially hidden behind a tree, just standing and watching me. I could see no details, just a silhouette. Panic surged through me. I didn't run at first. I wasn't sure if moving would provoke them. But then I remembered something basic. Stay alive. I grabbed my pack and ran, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me. I didn't stop until I reached the bridge, a small wooden structure spanning the stream. I crossed carefully, listening behind me. Nothing followed immediately, but I didn't look back. I pushed on through the forest, now hyper-aware, moving faster than I had intended. Every shadow a potential threat. By nightfall, I was exhausted, every step heavier than the last. I decided I couldn't continue in the dark. I needed shelter. I found a small overhang formed by a fallen tree and rocks, enough to shield me from the wind. It wasn't ideal, but I curled up with my sleeping bag, knife in hand, flashlight beside me, waiting for the sun to rise. I barely slept, the cold gnawing at my body, my mind refusing to rest. Every noise was magnified in the night, and I kept imagining movement just beyond my vision. The next morning, I heard distant voices and the sound of a vehicle. My heart leaped. I scrambled over the rocks and branches, following the sound, until I reached a narrow dirt road. A truck passed slowly, its tires kicking up dust. I waved frantically until it stopped. A man in the passenger seat jumped out, asking if I was okay. I tried to explain in broken sentences, still shaking, still trying to catch my breath. He nodded, calling someone on the radio, and soon another vehicle arrived. They offered me water and blankets. I realized how dehydrated and exhausted I was. I hadn't eaten much in over 24 hours, hadn't slept properly, and my body ached all over. They drove me to the nearest ranger station, where I finally sat down, legs trembling, feeling the tension in my body slowly release. I explained what had happened. The rangers listened carefully, taking notes. They told me it was unusual for someone to be following hikers like that, especially in such a remote area. They planned to search the trail. I realized then how lucky I was. One wrong turn, one moment of hesitation, and things could have ended very differently. I spent the night at the station, finally resting on a proper bed, listening to the soft hum of the heating system, feeling safe for the first time in 2 days. In the days that followed, I kept thinking about what had happened. The fear I felt wasn't from monsters or ghosts. It was from the real possibility of human danger in a place I thought was safe. Nature was indifferent, yes, but people could be dangerous, unpredictable. I learned to respect the wilderness, to prepare more, to never underestimate how alone you can truly be, even on a well-marked trail. That trip changed how I saw the world, how I saw myself. It was terrifying, but it was also a lesson. I survived because of careful planning, awareness, and a bit of luck. And when I returned home, I appreciated the quiet, safe, predictable life I had left behind for a moment of adventure that turned into one of the scariest experiences of my life. I still go hiking now, but differently. I stick to popular trails, I make sure people know my plan, I carry more than I think I need, and I never, ever ignore that feeling that something is off. Fear is useful if you listen to it. That forest taught me that lesson harshly and clearly, and I have never forgotten it. I had always thought of myself as experienced when it came to camping. I had spent years hiking trails, sleeping under the stars, and surviving in the wilderness. I had a sense for what was dangerous and what wasn't. But nothing in my experience could have prepared me for the night I spent in that remote section of the Rocky Mountains, miles away from any main road or marked trail. It started out as a routine solo camping trip, something I often did to clear my mind and escape the constant noise of city life. I wanted isolation, the kind where the only sounds are the wind in the trees, the occasional bird, and my own breathing. I arrived at the trailhead in the late morning. The sun was still low, but strong, cutting through the mist in patches across the valley. I parked my old Jeep, loaded with my usual gear: a tent, sleeping bag, a small cooking stove, water bottles, hiking clothes, and enough food for 3 days. I had also packed a first aid kit, a compass, a map, a multi-tool, and a decent hunting knife. I did not carry a gun because I had never felt the need for one, but I knew how to handle myself if things went wrong. The trail I had chosen was rarely used. Most hikers stuck to the main paths, but I liked the challenge of bushwhacking through overgrown areas and following less traveled paths. My plan was to hike deep into the woods, set up camp near a stream I had found on a topographic map, and spend a few days alone with nature. At first, the hike was peaceful. The trees were tall, thick, and green, their leaves rustling gently with the wind. Birds darted between the branches, and the smell of wet soil mixed with pine filled the air. I felt invigorated, carrying my pack up the gentle inclines of the trail. By the afternoon, the trail became less clear. Fallen trees blocked the path in several places, and I had to climb over or go around them. The forest grew denser, and the light from the sun became filtered and dim. I kept an eye on the map, making sure I was heading toward the stream. The air became cooler, and the quietness started to feel heavier. I noticed small things I had not paid attention to before. The broken branches that looked recent, the animal tracks in the mud that were larger than any deer I knew, and the occasional distant snapping sound that made me freeze and scan my surroundings. Eventually, I found the stream. It was narrow but fast-flowing, and the water was clear. I followed it upstream, searching for a flat area to pitch my tent. I found a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines and some scrubby bushes. The ground was damp but firm. I set up my tent, making sure it was anchored properly, and built a small fire pit from rocks. By the time I finished, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the clearing. I cooked a simple meal, just some canned beans and rice, and ate slowly while listening to the forest. As darkness began to fall, the temperature dropped quickly. I wore all my layers and crawled into my sleeping bag early. I wanted to get some rest for a long hike planned the next day. The first few hours were fine. The fire had mostly died down, and I listened to the normal night sounds: crickets, the rustle of leaves, and the gentle trickle of the stream. Then, I heard something that made my stomach tighten. It was faint at first, almost like the snapping of a twig under heavy boots, but irregular and deliberate. I froze, straining my ears. The sounds came again, closer this time. Not animals. They were too heavy, too calculated. Someone or something was walking nearby. My first thought was that it might be a hiker or a hunter, but this area was almost entirely abandoned. My gut told me it was unusual. I stayed as still as I could, listening. The noises moved in a circle around my clearing. Branches snapped further away, and then closer again. My heart rate increased, but I forced myself to remain calm. Panicking would not help. I considered leaving, but the darkness made hiking dangerous. I decided to wait it out, thinking that whoever it was would move along. Hours passed. Every so often, I would hear heavy footsteps, but I never saw anyone. The darkness of the forest was complete. No moon was visible through the thick canopy. My fire had burned down to embers, so I could not rely on it for light. I stayed in my tent, listening, trying to breathe evenly. I could hear the crunch of leaves, the soft sound of movement, and the occasional plop of water in the stream. Sleep did not come. I kept checking my knife and imagining every possible scenario. Eventually, the noises stopped. I waited another hour, convinced that I was not safe to leave the tent, then finally managed a restless sleep. I woke before dawn, shivering despite my sleeping bag. The forest looked different in the dim morning light. Branches hung low, damp from dew, and the fog clung to the stream. I decided to break camp quickly. I had no idea what had been moving around me, and I did not want to find out. Packing the tent and supplies was slow but necessary. Every rustle made me jump. I left the clearing, following the stream downstream in hopes of finding the trail. The sounds of the forest were different in the morning. Birds sang more loudly, and I even saw a deer grazing at the edge of the trees. Yet, the memory of the previous night kept my senses on high alert. I made a mental note to mark my path carefully. Mid-morning, I reached a section of the stream where the bank was steep and slippery. While climbing over a cluster of wet rocks, I lost my footing and fell, scraping my leg badly. Pain shot through my thigh, but I managed to hold onto a tree root and prevent a worse fall. I took a moment to assess the injury. It was bleeding moderately, but not life-threatening. I cleaned it as best I could with my water bottle and wrapped it with a bandage from my first aid kit. The fall had slowed me down, but I kept moving. As the day progressed, the forest became more treacherous. Fallen logs, mud patches, and sudden drops made navigation difficult. I realized I had been following the stream for hours without encountering any sign of the main trail. Anxiety began to creep in. The forest was dense, and my energy was fading. My water supply was running low, and I had eaten only half my rations. I needed to find the trail before nightfall. In the late afternoon, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice, muffled and low, called my name. At first, I thought I imagined it. I had been alone for hours, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. Someone was in the woods with me. My mind raced. Could be a lost hiker or, worse, someone with ill intentions. I did not want confrontation. I tried to make my way quietly, keeping low and using the trees as cover, moving as swiftly as possible. By evening, I reached a small clearing. My legs were aching, and my leg wound had slowed my pace significantly. I debated whether to stay until daylight or keep moving. I knew I could not stop for long. I decided to climb a small ridge to get a better view. The climb was painful, but I managed to reach the top as the sun dipped below the horizon. From there, I could see a thin line of smoke rising far in the distance. A ranger station. Relief surged through me. I could follow the ridge toward the smoke and safety. The descent from the ridge was tricky. Loose rocks and steep slopes slowed me, and I had to be careful not to aggravate my injury. I kept my eyes and ears open for anyone who might be following me, but the forest seemed quiet. The sound of the distant stream and the wind in the trees became my guide. Darkness fell quickly, but I knew the smoke indicated nearby human presence, which meant I was close to safety. Finally, after a grueling 2 hours of navigating through darkness and pain, I reached the edge of the forest. A dirt road stretched ahead, and faint lights glowed from the ranger station. I limped toward it, exhausted but alive. The relief was overwhelming. I could see people now, figures moving near the station, and I called out as loudly as my tired body would allow. A ranger emerged and rushed to meet me. I explained my situation as best I could. The fall, the injury, and the fear of someone else in the woods. They quickly offered first aid and helped me into the station. I spent the night at the ranger station, wrapped in blankets, eating warm food, and drinking water. I was shaken, sore, and completely drained, but safe. The rangers assured me that no one had been reported missing or seen in the area recently, which meant whatever I had heard and felt was either someone passing through quietly or an unknown presence. Regardless, I had survived the night, and the experience left me more cautious and aware than I had ever been in my life. In the following days, I recovered physically and mentally. I stayed in the ranger station, helping them map out the trails I had taken and warning them about the denser, more dangerous areas of the forest. The injury on my leg healed, and I returned home with a deeper respect for isolation, for the wilderness, and for the unseen dangers that can exist even in familiar terrain. The experience stayed with me for years, a reminder that nature is beautiful but unforgiving, and that survival depends on attention, preparation, and a willingness to act decisively when circumstances turn threatening. I never went back to that part of the forest. I still hike, still camp, but always with caution, always alert, and always respecting the fact that even a familiar environment can become terrifying in an instant. That trip taught me a lesson I could not unlearn. The line between adventure and danger is thinner than we like to admit, and sometimes the greatest threat is not the unknown, but what we assume we understand. I had planned this camping trip for months. It wasn't the kind of trip where I went with friends or a group. I like solitude, and the forest had always drawn me in. There was a small national park, far from the main roads, barely touched by anyone, that I had discovered on a map. It had a river, a dense canopy of trees, and a wide stretch of flat land that seemed perfect for pitching a tent. I had driven for hours on the narrow, winding roads until the asphalt gave way to gravel and then to dirt tracks barely wide enough for a single vehicle. The further I went, the quieter everything became. No hum of traffic, no distant sounds of human life, just the occasional bird and the rustle of leaves. Felt like stepping into a place the world had forgotten. By the time I arrived, it was late afternoon. The sun had begun its slow descent, and the forest was already casting long shadows across the land. I parked my car near the riverbank and started unloading my gear. I had a large tent, a backpack with food, water, and survival gear, and a small first aid kit just in case. I always prepared thoroughly, because even minor injuries out here could turn dangerous fast. The forest smelled clean, damp, and earthy, with a faint hint of moss and decaying leaves. The river gurgled nearby, a soothing sound, and I could see a few deer grazing in the distance, their ears flicking at every small noise. I set up my tent on a patch of relatively flat ground close enough to the river to hear the water but far enough to avoid any risk of flooding. The ground was soft, covered in a thick layer of pine needles, and I could feel the slight unevenness as I hammered in the stakes. Once the tent was up, I arranged my sleeping bag and gear inside, checked that everything was secure, and sat for a moment just to take in the quiet. The forest seemed alive, not with human activity, but with its own rhythm, subtle and constant. As the light faded, I lit a small campfire. The sound of the crackling fire mixed with the river created a strangely calming effect. I roasted some food, ate slowly, and made sure all my essentials were within reach. By the time darkness fully settled in, I was exhausted but satisfied. The sky above the trees turned a deep indigo, and the first stars began to appear. It was beautiful, almost hypnotic, but there was something else. A subtle feeling, a sort of awareness that I wasn't alone, even though I could see nothing. I brushed it off as imagination, tiredness, or nerves. Around midnight, I woke to a strange noise. At first, it was faint, just a whisper of movement through the trees, almost like the sound of footsteps over dry leaves. I froze, listening. My heart started to beat faster, but I reminded myself it could be an animal, a fox, a raccoon, or even a deer. The forest was full of nocturnal creatures. But then the sound changed, slow, deliberate, and heavier than the soft padding of small animals. It was approaching my campsite. I could hear it moving along the edge of the clearing, careful but steady. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it around the campsite, trying to see if anything had come close. The beam caught the trunks of trees and the glint of leaves but revealed nothing. Still, the sound persisted, circling, shifting. Stopped for a moment, then started again. I realized with a jolt that it was not random. It was moving around me, staying at the edge of the clearing, just out of sight. My heart raced, and I silently cursed myself for coming here alone. I didn't want to panic. I told myself that if it was an animal, it wouldn't linger. Wild animals typically avoid humans. I slowly picked up a heavy stick, my makeshift weapon, and stood near the fire, hoping the light would discourage whatever was there. The sound stopped again, and then I heard it, breathing. Slow, deliberate, and deep, unmistakably human. I froze. My mind raced through possibilities. Could it be another camper? But who would be out here at this hour without a light, without announcing themselves? It didn't make sense. The next few minutes were a blur of fear and vigilance. I stayed perfectly still, listening. The breathing continued, moving closer, just beyond the ring of firelight. My instinct was screaming at me to run, but I knew the forest at night was dangerous, especially in unfamiliar terrain. Falling or twisting an ankle could be fatal this far from civilization. I slowly reached for my phone, hoping I had service, but as I suspected, there was none. No signal, no way to call for help. Then I saw movement, a shadow flitting between the trees, not far away, but never stepping into the light. Whoever it was, they were careful, experienced, and watching. Panic hit me in waves. My mind jumped to every scenario: robbery, assault, worse. I tried to reason, to think of something to do. I considered shouting, but if it was someone dangerous, noise could provoke them. I considered running to my car, but that would put me in open space, exposed. My only option was to stay calm, stay where I was, and hope they went away. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. It was hard to tell in the darkness. Every rustle made me flinch. Every snap of a twig sent my heart into my throat. I could hear nothing but the occasional water sound from the river and the slow, deliberate breathing somewhere in the trees. Eventually, just as dawn began to lighten the sky with faint orange and pink streaks, I noticed that the sounds had stopped. The shadow had disappeared. The forest was quiet again, filled only with birds beginning to wake. I didn't dare relax. I packed my gear quickly, extinguished the fire, and stayed alert as I moved toward my car. The forest looked different in daylight, less threatening, more ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been observing me. When I reached the car, I checked all around before getting in. The interior smelled of pine needles and smoke from the fire, but everything seemed intact. I sat for a moment, breathing heavily, trying to calm down. The drive back on the dirt roads was tense. I kept looking in the mirrors, scanning the edges of the forest, but there was no one. Once I hit the main road, civilization slowly returned. Distant houses, passing cars, the faint hum of human activity. I felt a cautious relief, though a shadow of that fear stayed with me for weeks afterward. After that trip, I returned home, but I couldn't stop thinking about the figure in the trees. I reported the experience to park authorities, who said they had occasional reports of trespassers or people living off the grid, but nothing dangerous was confirmed. In the end, I realized the scariest part wasn't whether they were going to harm me. It was the uncertainty, the knowledge that someone had been close enough to watch, yet invisible enough to avoid detection. That sense of being observed, of vulnerability in a place I had thought was safe, lingered far longer than the actual night. I still camp, still seek solitude, but I am more careful now. I always make sure someone knows where I am. I set up in places where I can see all approaches. I carry more tools for defense, even if they're only deterrence. And I've learned to trust my instincts, the subtle unease, the hint that something is not quite right. Because in the wild, those instincts can mean the difference between coming home safely and disappearing without a trace. Even months later, when I lie in my own bed, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, feeling again the slow, deliberate breathing of that figure circling in the dark. I know now that fear doesn't always come from ghosts or monsters. It often comes from other humans, the ones we cannot see, the ones whose intentions are unknown. And sometimes, that fear, real as it is the best teacher, reminding us to respect the wild, the unknown, and the simple fact that we are not always alone. I had planned the trip for weeks. I needed it more than I realized at the time, though I didn't know it then. The city had become a cage for me, with its constant noise, the harsh glare of neon lights at all hours, the endless churn of people who all seemed busy. But for what, I didn't know. I wanted silence. I wanted to feel small, to feel like my problems shrank against the vastness of the world. That's why I packed my old, beaten-up backpack, the one I had carried on smaller trips before, and drove 3 hours out of the city to a patch of forest that was supposed to be empty, except for the trails marked on the map. I arrived just as the sun was falling behind the tall pines. The forest was dense, the trees leaning over the narrow dirt road as if they were inspecting me. I parked my car in a small clearing and unloaded my gear slowly. I wanted to do everything deliberately, to let the calm of the place settle into me. I set up my tent, which was worn from previous trips, its fabric faded by sun and rain, the poles a little bent. I found a small clearing nearby for the fire, gathering dry wood and kindling from the forest floor. The air was clean, cold, and slightly damp. There was a smell of wet pine and earth that seemed almost sharp, refreshing in a way I hadn't noticed in years. By the time I had my fire going, the sun had disappeared completely, leaving the forest in a dim blue light. The fire crackled, throwing long shadows over the trees, making the dark patches between the trunks look deeper than they were. I cooked some beans over the flames, savoring the sound of the fire and the wind moving through the leaves. Birds had gone quiet hours before, leaving the forest with only the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Everything was peaceful, almost painfully so. I fell asleep that first night to the smell of smoke and earth, the quiet broken only by the occasional snapping of a branch. I slept uneasily, mostly because I was alone. The isolation was part of why I had come, but being alone brought a certain edge to the quiet, a sharpness that made every rustle a question rather than just a sound. The next morning, I woke early to the sound of birds returning. The forest had a light mist that rose from the damp earth, curling around the tree trunks like smoke. I made coffee over the fire, letting the smell of it fill the small clearing while I looked around at the forest. Everything seemed normal. The trees, the uneven ground, the small trail I had planned to hike. But there was a strange heaviness to the air. Not threatening exactly, just dense, like it had memory, like it had been a long time since anyone walked these parts and the forest didn't quite know what to do with me there. I decided to take a short hike, staying on the marked trail. The path wound through tall pines and occasional patches of birch, the white bark standing out in the dim green light. The trail was uneven, covered in roots and small rocks that threatened to trip me at every step. I kept a small pack with water, snacks, and a basic first aid kit. The forest seemed endless, but I reassured myself that the trail looped back to my camp. It was when I came to a small stream that things began to feel off. Not dangerous, not threatening, just odd. The water was clear and cold, trickling over smooth rocks, but I noticed that the usual forest noises were gone. Birds were silent, no insects buzzed. The wind had dropped entirely. I stopped and listened, and it was the silence that struck me first. Silence like a wall. I kept walking, telling myself I was imagining it, but the feeling grew. Hours passed. The trail twisted more sharply, the trees crowding in. The sun moved across the sky, but the canopy was thick, letting little light through. When I looked at my map, I realized I had somehow strayed off the path. The trail I thought I was following had disappeared beneath fallen leaves and broken branches. My heart started to beat a little faster. I wasn't lost yet, I told myself, but the idea was starting to sink in that I could be. I tried retracing my steps, moving carefully through the underbrush, noting the position of the sun and the patterns of light and shadow. But every time I thought I recognized a familiar tree or rock, the forest seemed to shift. Branches blocked paths I thought I had come through. Fallen trees appeared where none had been before. Panic was a slow creep, not a sudden wave. I could feel my breathing become shallow, my palms slightly damp. By late afternoon, I was convinced I had wandered far from my campsite. My water was low, my legs were sore, and the forest had taken on a more oppressive feel. Shadows stretched unnaturally, the gaps between trees forming shapes that seemed alive, even though I knew they were just shadows. I tried to keep calm, forcing myself to move in what I thought was the direction back, marking trees with small cuts of my knife so I could follow them if I needed to retrace my steps. Night fell before I found any sign of my trail. The forest became darker than I expected, the canopy blotting out the stars. I stopped moving, unsure if I should continue or stay put. I built a small fire in a tiny clearing, careful to shield it from the wind. The flames gave comfort, a circle of light in the thick darkness. I ate the last of my snacks, sipping water slowly, and tried to calm my mind. That night, the sounds of the forest became sharper. I could hear small animals moving close to me, the occasional snap of a twig, but no large noises. I slept fitfully, waking at every rustle. It was a hard sleep, broken into hours, but it was enough to let me recover slightly. The next morning, I made a plan. I would follow the sun as best I could, moving east, since my map indicated that the road I had driven in on was in that direction. I kept my fire kit ready, knowing I might need it at any moment, and moved slowly, marking trees as I went. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, the same patterns repeating, but I forced myself to keep walking. Midday brought a small sense of hope. I heard the faint hum of a car engine far off, a sound so distant it could have been my imagination. I followed it, moving carefully, taking note of landmarks, and eventually reached a clearing I had not seen before. Beyond it, I could make out a small dirt road. Relief was a sharp, almost painful feeling in my chest. I ran toward it, the brush snagging my clothes, branches scratching my arms, but I didn't care. When I reached the road, I realized it was not the road I had come in on, but a smaller logging path. It was empty, quiet, but it was civilization compared to the dense forest I had been lost in. I followed it, hoping it would intersect with the main road. Hours later, just as the sun began to fall again, I saw a truck coming down the path. I waved my arms, and it slowed, the driver looking concerned. I explained as best I could, though I was exhausted, dehydrated, and sore. The driver gave me a ride back to the main road, where I called the police to report my location and the fact that I had been lost. They told me that if I had stayed off my planned trail much longer, it could have been days before anyone found me. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine at that thought. By the time I returned to my car, the forest behind me seemed completely ordinary again. The trees looked the same as they had when I arrived, the underbrush normal, the silence now gentle rather than oppressive. I packed up quickly, drove back toward the city, and as I did, I reflected on the sheer weight of being alone in a place like that, where a single mistake could spiral into a real danger. At home, I unpacked my gear slowly, inspecting it for damage and cleaning the dirt off. I realized that camping in the wilderness wasn't just about enjoying nature. It was about preparation, respect, and awareness. One wrong step, one wrong turn, and it could have been a disaster. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt humbled. The forest had been indifferent to me, and I had survived by paying attention, by staying calm, and by refusing to give in to panic. After the trip, I never took my safety for granted again. I learned to always carry extra water, a detailed map, and a compass to mark my path clearly, and to never assume that a trail was simple or that a forest was predictable. The experience changed the way I approached not only camping but life itself. I understood how fragile our sense of control could be, how quickly comfort could turn to fear. But I also understood resilience. I survived because I kept moving, kept thinking, and never let fear make me stop entirely. Even years later, when I returned to forests, I carried that memory with me. Not as a story of horror, but as a reminder that the wild doesn't need to be cruel or supernatural to be terrifying. It is terrifying because it is real, because it is vast, because a single lapse in judgment can become a real threat. And that is why I respect it and why I survived. I had been planning this solo camping trip for months. My life had become a constant blur of work, errands, and endless responsibilities, and I needed a break. A real escape into the wilderness. Somewhere I could be alone, disconnected from everything. I had chosen a small, remote forest in the northern part of the state, one that was not widely known to tourists, where the trails were barely marked and the land seemed untouched. I had packed carefully. A tent, sleeping bag, enough food for several days, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, a sturdy backpack, a flashlight, and my old hunting knife. I wanted to rely on my own skills and my own judgment, not on modern conveniences which I felt had dulled my sense of awareness. The drive to the trailhead was long and quiet. The roads narrowed as I got closer to the forest, eventually turning into gravel and dirt, lined by dense trees. By the time I arrived, the sun was low, hanging above the horizon with a dull orange glow. I parked my car and double-checked my backpack before stepping out. The forest greeted me with the smell of pine needles and damp earth. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of wet moss and decomposing leaves. I felt a mix of excitement and tension as I started walking along the trail. First, everything seemed peaceful. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, and the wind whispered through the branches. The trail was narrow, overgrown in places, forcing me to push branches aside as I went. I moved slowly, taking careful note of landmarks so I could find my way back. After about 2 hours, I reached a clearing where the ground flattened out and there was enough space to pitch my tent. I chose a spot a little away from the main trail, near a small ridge that overlooked a shallow stream. The spot was perfect, quiet, hidden, and surrounded by tall trees that offered both shelter and privacy. I set up my tent with deliberate care. I hammered the stakes into the soil, making sure the tent was taut and stable. I arranged my sleeping bag inside and set up a small area outside for cooking. I gathered firewood, careful to choose pieces that were dry and sturdy enough to burn through the night. By the time I finished, the sun had completely disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the forest in a dim twilight. I lit a small fire, enjoying the warmth against the evening chill, and boiled water for my dinner. It was only when the darkness fully settled in that the forest began to change. The sounds shifted. The gentle rustle of leaves and distant bird calls were replaced by something more unsettling. There was a weight to the darkness, a quiet tension that made every small sound sharper. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the underbrush, made me tense. I reminded myself that it was natural, wild animals, the wind, but my heart beat faster regardless. I ate quickly, washing down the food with water from my bottle, and then turned to my next task, preparing for the night. I made sure my knife was within reach and that my flashlight had fresh batteries. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that I had been camping alone before and that I knew how to handle the isolation. Around midnight, the first strange noises started. I was lying on my sleeping pad, listening to the forest, when I heard something moving not far from my camp. It wasn't a human sound. No voices, no footsteps on a trail, but a low, dragging noise, like something heavy brushing against fallen branches and leaves. My first thought was a deer or a large animal moving through the underbrush, but as I listened, the sounds grew closer. There was a deliberate rhythm, a consistency that didn't match normal animal movement. My stomach tightened, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. I gripped my knife, my mind running through all the possibilities. Bears were common in this forest, but they usually made loud crashing noises, not slow, careful movement. The fire I had built was almost out, leaving me in near darkness except for the dim glow of embers. I considered leaving the tent and climbing the ridge to get a better view, but I knew that stepping outside would make me more vulnerable. I decided to stay still, hoping whatever it was would pass. The noises stopped for a few tense minutes, but then I heard a snap, close, precise, deliberate. Something had stepped on a branch right near my tent. My heart raced. I held my breath, listening to the silence that followed. Minutes passed. My ears strained to catch any sound, any indication of what was happening. Then I heard it again, soft, careful steps circling the perimeter of my camp. My mind raced through all the possible scenarios. A bear could have wandered this close, though it would probably have made louder noises. Could it be another person? The thought sent a cold wave through me. I was alone here, and the nearest campsite was miles away. Who would be out here in the middle of the night? And why would they circle quietly instead of announcing themselves? I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that panicking would only make things worse. I checked my phone, but there was no signal, no way to call for help. I decided my only option was to make the tent as uninviting as possible. I lit a few pieces of the remaining firewood, trying to create light and heat. The small fire crackled and cast flickering shadows across the clearing. I grabbed my flashlight, holding it ready. I considered making noise to scare away whatever was there, but something in me hesitated. I didn't want to reveal my exact location if this was a human intruder. The steps continued. Sometimes they were very close, sometimes they moved away and returned. I realized that whatever it was, it had patience. It wasn't just passing through. It was observing, testing, waiting. Hours passed like this. I stayed awake, barely sleeping, holding my knife and flashlight. The night seemed endless, every sound amplified, every shadow suspicious. I began to notice other signs. Disturbed leaves in a small circle around my camp, a broken branch leaning against a tree near my fire, a faint smell in the air that I couldn't immediately identify. My mind ran through every survival scenario I had ever read about or practiced. By dawn, the figure or figures had disappeared. The first light of morning revealed no footprints or tracks, no clear sign of what had circled me. I was exhausted but relieved to see the sunlight piercing through the trees. I packed my camp as quickly as I could, constantly scanning the forest for movement. Every rustle made me jump. I decided to hike back to my car the long way, avoiding the main trail, moving through dense brush and higher ground where I had a clear view of the surrounding area. As I walked, I began to notice more signs. Broken branches leading deeper into the forest, flattened patches of grass, and small piles of disturbed earth. I realized that someone or something had been following me for hours, moving silently, watching me from the shadows. I felt a mixture of fear and determination. I couldn't let them catch me unprepared. I stayed alert, constantly changing direction, moving in zigzags, stopping frequently to listen. Several hours later, I finally reached my car. Relief washed over me as I sat inside, locking the doors and checking my surroundings. The forest was silent now, seemingly calm, but I knew the truth. Whoever had been out there was gone for now, but they had been close enough to see me, to track me. I drove away slowly, not daring to speed, constantly glancing in the rearview mirror. When I reached the first paved road, I felt a weight lift slightly, though I remained tense. I reported the incident to the local ranger station as soon as I reached a town with cell service. They took notes but couldn't offer much reassurance, as remote areas like this were prone to occasional intrusions. The days after the trip were strange. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and I became hyper-aware of every sound and movement around me. But I also realized that I had survived because I stayed calm, relied on my preparation, and trusted my instincts. The experience had been terrifying, but it had also strengthened me. I began to take additional precautions whenever I ventured into the wilderness. I carried a small GPS tracker, an emergency whistle, pepper spray, and made a point of always letting someone know my exact route. Over time, the fear turned into a sort of respect for the wilderness, for the unpredictability of human behavior, and for my own ability to handle extreme situations. I never discovered exactly what had circled my camp that night, and part of me knew I might never find out. But I understood that in situations like that, certainty was a luxury, and survival depended on observation, preparation, and calm action. I returned to that forest months later, not to relive the fear, but to prove to myself that I could be there again without panic. This time, I camped in a more visible area, near a small ranger trail with my safety equipment at the ready. The forest felt familiar, almost comforting in its quiet order. I spent the night under the stars, listening to the gentle sounds of nature, and for the first time, I felt at peace. I had faced something that had pushed me to the edge, and I had come through it alive and stronger. I had always loved camping, the kind where the forest felt endless, the sky stretched wide, and the only sounds were leaves rustling and the occasional bird. I was not a thrill seeker or a reckless adventurer, but there was something calming about being deep in nature, away from everything, carrying nothing but a backpack, a tent, and the few things necessary to survive a couple of days. That weekend, I decided to go alone. It was late September, and the air had a chill that hinted at approaching winter, though the sun still felt warm when it shone. The forest I picked was known for being quiet and isolated. Maps said there were trails, but I had no real plan. I only intended to walk until I found a spot that felt right to camp, set up my tent, and spend a night immersed in silence. The drive to the trailhead had been long, winding along gravel roads flanked by trees that had already begun to turn yellow and orange. By the time I parked, the sun was low, casting long shadows that stretched across the forest floor. I had my pack with me: a small tent, a sleeping bag rated for cold nights, a portable stove, a few cans of beans, a couple of energy bars, water, a flashlight, matches, a knife, and a first aid kit. I was not over-prepared, but I was careful. I had gone on solo hikes before and knew enough to avoid most dangers, but nothing about that weekend would have prepared me for what came next. The trail started well-marked. I walked slowly, savoring the crunch of leaves under my boots and the faint smell of pine and damp soil. Occasionally, a bird would call, and I would stop to look up, seeing the sun filtering through the branches. I had my camera tucked in my pack, but I didn't take it out. I wanted to keep my hands free in case I needed them. The farther I went, the quieter it became. Soon, the occasional hum of a distant highway faded, replaced by the subtle movements of the forest, small branches snapping under tiny feet, leaves rustling without wind, the faint drip of water from leaves into puddles on the ground. By the time I reached a clearing I thought might be suitable for camp, the sun had already sunk, leaving the forest in a soft, gray light. I set up my tent in a small depression, partly surrounded by a few tall pines and a fallen log. I arranged my sleeping bag and checked my stove and water. The forest felt alive, not in a magical sense, but in the raw, physical way of the world. Every sound seemed amplified as darkness crept in. I had planned to start a small fire, but the ground was damp, and the wood I found was more wet than dry. Still, I managed a small flame, enough to cook my beans and provide some warmth. I ate quickly, washing it down with water from my bottle, and then I settled into my sleeping bag, leaving my knife within reach. That was when I first noticed the sound. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the natural noises of the forest. A soft, rhythmic snapping. At first, I told myself it was a branch falling somewhere in the distance, or perhaps a small animal moving through the undergrowth. But as the minutes passed, it didn't stop. The snaps were deliberate, not random. They were coming closer. I tried to stay calm. The forest is full of animals, I reasoned. Perhaps a deer, perhaps something smaller like a fox or raccoon. But then the snaps began to circle my tent. Not wildly, but deliberately, like someone or something was walking around me, keeping its distance. My stomach sank. I was not a stranger to fear. I had been on trails late at night before, but I had always had cell service, a plan, or at least the reassurance of people nearby. Not here. Not tonight. I stayed still, listening, straining my ears. The snaps continued, slow and methodical, coming from different directions, moving in a pattern I could not predict. My flashlight lay beside me, but I didn't dare turn it on. Light would draw attention. My mind began to race through worst-case scenarios. A bear could make that sound, but bears usually give a warning growl or snort before getting this close. Wolves? Rare but possible. Humans. That thought made me freeze. I had heard stories, of course, of hikers encountering people with bad intentions deep in the woods, but I had always assumed I was careful enough to avoid that. Then the wind shifted. The smell hit me first. Not a smell of animals, but of smoke and damp earth and something more metallic. I realized my fire had been smoldering slightly under the ashes, giving off a faint smoke that now mingled with the forest air. But the metallic scent, that wasn't mine. couldn't place it. It was faint but unmistakable. I decided I had to stay low and quiet. My body went tense as I reached for my knife, keeping it close to my chest. I held my breath, listening. The snapping stopped. Complete silence. I could hear the soft hiss of my small fire and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Minutes passed. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal circling and curious, then moving on. But then came the sound that froze me completely. A heavy, deliberate step on the log behind me. Someone was there. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I tried to convince myself that running now would make me a target, that staying put might buy me some time. I remember thinking about how little I knew about this area. Cell service would be spotty at best. There were no other campers around for miles. Every instinct told me that any noise I made could be fatal. The minutes dragged into what felt like hours. I stayed still, listening. Then another sound. A faint whisper of movement, like fabric brushing against trees. My mind went over every possible scenario. Robbers? Some transient person living in the woods? I had read about cases where people would follow hikers, waiting until nightfall. My stomach churned. Fear pressed down like a physical weight. I realized I had to act. Staying in the tent made me a target. I needed to move to higher ground, somewhere I could see, somewhere the forest would give me some advantage. Carefully, I unzipped the tent just a crack, peeking out. The darkness was thick, almost a living thing. I could see nothing but shadows. The steps had stopped. I waited, counting slowly to 20 in my head. No movement. I grabbed my pack quietly, keeping the knife ready. I moved, low and slow, sticking to the shadows, making my way toward a ridge I had noticed on the hike in. Every branch that cracked underfoot made my heart leap. Every rustle of leaves made me freeze. The forest seemed alive with unseen eyes. I kept telling myself it could still be an animal, that I was overreacting, but every rational thought was drowned in fear. After what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, I reached the ridge. I paused, trying to get my bearings. The ridge gave me a view of the clearing where I had camped. My stomach sank. The tent was gone. Not collapsed, not burned. Gone. Completely vanished. I couldn't understand it. I checked my pack, my knife still there. Nothing else was missing. I stayed on the ridge, scanning the darkness, every muscle tense. Then I saw movement, or what I thought was movement. A figure, low and hunched, slipping through the shadows where my tent had been. I couldn't tell if it was human or animal. I didn't wait to find out. I turned, moving along the ridge toward a service road I had seen marked on my map. I didn't dare run blindly, but I moved as fast and quietly as possible. Every snap of a branch behind me sent adrenaline through my veins. I told myself that the moment I reached the road, I could run to my car, call for help, finally be safe. The hike to the road took far longer than it should have. Darkness was complete now, and the forest seemed to close in. My flashlight flickered on and off, unreliable, but it helped me keep a path. I stumbled, cut my hand on a branch, bruised my knee on a rock, but I didn't stop. The fear kept me moving. Finally, I reached the road. Headlights in the distance. Relief flooded through me. I flagged down the car, heart hammering, body trembling, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight steady. The driver stopped, and I explained in broken sentences that someone had been following me, that my tent had disappeared, that I needed help. They nodded, offered water, and drove me to the nearest ranger station. The rangers took my statement, checked the area, and searched for a few hours. No one was found. My tent had vanished without trace. My food and gear were mostly intact, but the rangers told me it could have been a transient camper or someone moving through the forest. They warned me that isolated forests are unpredictable and dangerous, even in places that seem safe. I returned home shaken, unable to sleep for nights, replaying every sound, every snap of branches. I still don't know what or who was there, but the lesson was clear. The forest is beautiful, but it is not forgiving. It can seem peaceful and safe, and yet in a single moment, everything can change. I stopped camping alone after that. The fear I experienced was real, tangible, and it taught me a respect I hadn't truly felt before. I learned that preparation is not just about gear, it is about awareness, strategy, and humility. The wilderness doesn't negotiate. You have to respect it and protect yourself. I had been planning the trip for weeks. Not for months, not for years, just weeks. But it felt like my mind had been circling the idea forever. I wanted a solo experience, deep in the forest, far from the city, far from the noise and the lights and the endless hum of human life. I wanted to feel alone and small, to see if I could handle nature in its rawest form, without any help or distractions. I packed my gear with care. A sturdy tent, a sleeping bag rated for low temperatures, a lightweight stove, a couple of packs of dehydrated meals, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, and of course, my hiking pack with essentials like a flashlight, extra batteries, a multi-tool, and a thick rope. I wanted to be ready for anything, but even as I packed, there was a quiet part of me that wondered if I was underestimating the wilderness, if I was thinking too much about adventure and not enough about danger. The drive to the trailhead was long, winding through back roads that narrowed as they climbed higher into the mountains. By the time I parked, the sun was already low, casting long shadows across the dense pines. I could feel the air changing as I stepped out of the car. It smelled of earth and needles, of damp moss, of cold that clung to your skin in a way that made it almost hard to breathe. The forest was quiet in a way that felt unnatural at first, like the absence of human sound created a kind of pressure that made my ears ring. I took a deep breath and shouldered my pack. The trail was steep from the start, a narrow ribbon of dirt winding between trees that towered overhead. I hiked for hours, moving slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the shadows, letting my mind adjust to the stillness. The trail twisted through thick undergrowth, crossed small streams that trickled over rocks, and climbed over boulders slick with moss. I passed no one. I didn't see footprints, didn't hear voices, didn't smell smoke. The forest was alive in a way that was patient, slow, unhurried, and completely indifferent to my presence. Birds called occasionally, but they kept their distance. A hawk circled overhead at one point, its shadow fleeting across the trail. Every rustle in the bushes made my heart jump. Every crack of a branch underfoot made me startle. I kept my knife handy, though I told myself it was more for comfort than necessity. By late afternoon, I found a clearing that seemed suitable for camping. It was small, flat, and shielded by a dense ring of trees. There was a small stream nearby, which I took as a good sign, and the ground was firm. I set up my tent carefully, anchoring it with stakes and adjusting the rain fly. I laid out my sleeping bag and organized my gear inside, thinking ahead to the night. I cooked a simple meal, watching as the sun dropped behind the ridges, casting a golden glow that faded to deep orange and then violet. The forest darkened quickly after the sun disappeared, and I found myself feeling both exhilarated and tense. Alone in the wilderness, every sound became significant. A squirrel rustling through leaves sounded like a footstep. The wind through the trees sounded like voices. I told myself over and over that these were just natural sounds, nothing more. Night fell fully, and I lay in my sleeping bag, listening. The stars came out, sharp and bright in the cold sky. I could hear the stream bubbling nearby, and the occasional call of an owl. The wind picked up, rattling branches and shaking loose leaves. I checked my flashlight, listened for any unusual noises, and tried to sleep. At some point, I realized that sleep was more difficult in the wild than I expected. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow more threatening. I told myself it was normal, that fear was natural when alone, but that didn't make the tension in my chest go away. Around midnight, the wind shifted. It was subtle at first, a change in direction that brought a different sound through the trees. I heard it before I realized what it was. A low, repetitive crunching on the forest floor. It was steady, deliberate, and moving closer. My stomach tightened. I held my breath, straining my ears, trying to tell myself that it could be a deer, maybe a bear, maybe nothing. But the rhythm didn't match any animal I knew. A deer moves quickly and erratically. A bear often pauses and sniffs. But this was steady, careful, and heavy. I kept still in my sleeping bag, heart hammering, eyes scanning the faint light of my flashlight through the mesh of the tent. The sound came closer, then paused, then moved again. I realized I had made a mistake in picking my spot. The clearing was small, yes, but it was bordered by thick forest, and I was downwind. Any animal or anything else could approach silently, and I would have little time to react. My knife felt small and useless in my hand, but I gripped it anyway, trying to prepare myself mentally. My mind raced through possibilities. I thought of bears, of cougars, of wild dogs. I remembered stories of hikers who had been attacked in their sleep. I told myself to stay calm, to listen carefully, to stay quiet. The noise circled my tent, scraping over fallen branches, breaking twigs, and I realized it had not been moving in a straight line. It was pacing, circling. Something was assessing me, I thought. I decided to wait it out. Every minute felt like an hour. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could feel the sweat on my back despite the cold. I imagined reaching for my backpack, grabbing my bear spray, trying to make a dash to the car. But the car was miles away, the trail steep, and the forest unrelenting. Running would be foolish, I told myself. I had to survive the night here. The sounds finally faded around 3 a.m. I did not sleep again that night. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves, every movement in the shadows made me freeze. I stayed awake, watching the darkness press against my tent. By dawn, my nerves were raw, my eyes bloodshot, my body tense from hours of immobility. When the first light broke through the trees, I saw the signs outside. My clearing had been visited. The ground around my tent was disturbed, prints in the mud that were too large to be human, claw marks on a nearby tree. A small patch of my tent fabric had been snagged, shredded slightly. I packed quickly, keeping my movements deliberate, aware of every sound. I left no food behind, took nothing for granted. I stayed on the trail as I descended, watching for signs of animals, listening for movement. The hike down was long, exhausting, mentally and physically. I felt tension the entire time, every shadow a potential threat. By the time I reached the car, my body ached. My hands were scraped from holding onto rocks and branches, and my mind felt frayed. I took a long drink of water, ate a small snack, and sat in silence for several minutes, just breathing and trying to let the adrenaline drain from my system. As I drove back toward civilization, I reflected on the experience. It had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been a lesson in preparation, patience, and respect for nature. I realized that the fear had not come from anything supernatural or imagined. It had come from the reality of being alone, unprotected, and in the presence of wild animals that could kill me. I had survived because I had stayed calm, because I had respected the signs, because I had not panicked. I thought about the prints, the claw marks, the circling noise. Could have been a bear, or maybe a cougar, or maybe even a large wild dog. Whatever it had been cautious, intelligent, and strong. And I had been careful enough to survive. When I got home, I cleaned my gear, inspected the tent, and tended to my scratches. I still felt a lingering unease for days after, a sense of smallness in the face of nature. But alongside that unease was a quiet pride, a recognition that I had endured something difficult, real, and dangerous, and had come out whole. I realized that adventure is not just about excitement or fun. It is about understanding limits, accepting risks, and respecting the wild for what it is. Unpredictable, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying. The experience changed the way I approached the outdoors. I became more careful, more prepared, more observant. I learned to read tracks, to understand the signs of animals nearby, to plan for emergencies I had never considered before. And while I never lost my desire for solitude in the forest, I approached it with a new respect, knowing that the wilderness is not a place to conquer, but a place to survive and observe, quietly and carefully, and only with humility. It was a night I will never forget, a night where fear and nature met in a way that was raw and real. It taught me that danger does not have to be exaggerated to be terrifying, that survival depends not on luck but on preparation, observation, and composure. I had gone seeking an adventure, but what I found was something far more profound. An understanding of the fragile balance between human life and the wild, a lesson etched into my memory with every print, every snapped branch, and every heartbeat that carried me safely through the night. I decided to spend a few days alone in the woods in late September. The weather had started to cool down, and the forest was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you hear every sound inside your own head. I had been planning this solo trip for months. My life had become too loud. Too many people, too much city noise, too much stress. I wanted to be alone somewhere still and quiet, where I could think and feel what silence really sounded like. The spot I chose was in a remote area of northern Oregon, near an old logging road that hadn't been used for decades. I'd found it on an old topographic map that showed a clearing beside a small river. It looked perfect. There were no marked trails leading to it, no campsites, no sign of people. That was exactly what I wanted. I packed light but smart. A small tent, a sleeping bag rated for cold nights, food for 4 days, a water filter, a hatchet, my camping stove, and a .22 rifle that I always brought when camping alone, not for hunting but for safety. I left early in the morning, driving until the paved roads disappeared, then following a dirt track until it became too rough for my truck. From there, I hiked in. The air smelled like wet pine needles and earth. The deeper I walked, the more I felt disconnected from the world I'd left behind. I could hear only the crunch of leaves under my boots, the faint hiss of wind through tall firs, and the occasional call of a bird that echoed somewhere high above me. It took almost 2 hours to reach the clearing, just as the sun was slipping past its highest point. The clearing was better than I'd expected. It was flat, surrounded by trees on 3 sides, with the 4th opening down to a slow-moving stream. The water looked cold and clean. I set up my tent near a fallen log and gathered some dry branches to make a small fire later. Everything felt peaceful, untouched. The way the forest smelled, the way the light filtered through the trees, the sound of the running water. It was all strangely comforting. By the time I finished setting up camp, the sun was already starting to dip low. I cooked a small meal on my stove, ate quietly while watching the sky turn gold, then pink, then fade into blue. The air got colder quickly after sunset. I added a few more pieces of wood to the fire and sat there until the flames began to die down. That first night, I slept lightly. The forest is never completely quiet at night. You hear things you don't during the day. The creak of trees moving in the wind, the small rustling sounds of animals in the underbrush. Every noise sounds closer than it really is when you're alone. I remember waking up once around 2 a.m. because of a sound I couldn't quite identify. Something like slow, soft steps in the leaves. Could have been a deer. I told myself it was a deer and tried to go back to sleep. The next morning, everything felt normal again. The sky was clear, and sunlight came through the trees in long, pale rays. I filtered some water from the stream, boiled it for coffee, and decided to go exploring. I wanted to see how far the forest went past the clearing. I followed the stream upstream for about an hour. The forest there was thick and uneven, with moss-covered logs and tall grass. I didn't see any signs of other people, no footprints, no old fire rings, nothing. By the time I came back to camp, it was early afternoon. I ate lunch, then sat near the water for a long time just listening. The peace of it was what I had come for, that deep, still quiet where the only sounds are the river and the wind. It wasn't until later that day, while gathering firewood, that I noticed something strange. About 30 yards from my camp, near a large cedar tree, I saw a small shape in the dirt. It looked like a boot print. It was faint and not very deep, but the shape was clear, the tread was different from mine. At first, I thought maybe it was an old logging worker's footprint left years ago, but when I looked closer, I could see the edges were still sharp, not softened by rain or time. Couldn't have been more than a day old. I stood there staring at it for a long time, trying to think of how it could have gotten there. Maybe some hunter had passed through. Maybe someone else used the same old map I did. I tried to shake it off, but I felt a little less comfortable after that. That night, I built the fire bigger than usual. I told myself it was just for warmth, but part of me wanted the light. When I finally went to bed, I left the fire smoldering, hoping it would keep burning for a few more hours. Sometime during the night, I woke again, this time certain I heard footsteps. They weren't fast or loud, but steady. I lay completely still in my sleeping bag, staring at the roof of the tent, listening. It sounded like someone walking just outside the circle of the firelight. The steps would come for a few seconds, then stop. Then I'd hear a faint rustle, like someone brushing against a branch. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe deeply. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. It went on for maybe a minute, maybe more. Then silence. I waited for what felt like forever before I finally reached for my flashlight. When I clicked it on, the tent walls glowed faintly from the beam. I slowly unzipped the flap and shined the light outside. Nothing. The fire had burned down to faint orange embers. Everything looked still. I didn't hear another sound that night. The next morning I found more footprints. Not one or two, several. They were faint, scattered, but definitely real. Some led toward the edge of the trees, others circled around the camp. None came close to the tent, but the pattern made it clear. Someone had been walking around out there during the night. It was strange, the tracks weren't large, maybe a men's size 9 or 10 boot. The same kind of footprint I'd seen the day before. There were no animal tracks nearby, no signs of dragging or struggle. Just footprints coming and going. I felt uneasy the whole day. I didn't go exploring. I stayed near camp, moving my gear closer together, keeping my rifle nearby. Every sound made me look up. The wind in the trees sounded heavier, like whispers I couldn't make out. I cooked early that evening and kept the fire burning longer. As the sky darkened, I realized how alone I really was. The nearest road was miles away. I hadn't seen or heard another human being since I'd left my truck. I told myself that maybe someone had passed through, maybe a hiker or trapper, and they were gone now, but that night proved otherwise. I woke to the sound of movement again, this time closer. It was unmistakable, soft but heavy steps, circling the edge of the camp. I stayed completely still, listening. Then I heard another sound, the crack of a branch breaking. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be quiet anymore. I unzipped the tent just enough to see outside. The fire had almost died out, and the moonlight barely touched the ground. I thought I saw movement near the tree line, just a shadow shifting between the trees. I lifted my flashlight and shined it, but the beam hit only empty forest. For hours I didn't sleep. I sat inside the tent with the rifle across my knees, waiting for dawn. Every few minutes I thought I heard faint noises, but they were too distant to tell. When the sky finally began to lighten, I crawled out of the tent and looked around. Near the edge of the clearing, I found something that made my stomach twist. A small piece of torn fabric hanging from a branch. It looked like part of a sleeve, maybe from a dark jacket. There was dirt on it and what looked like dried mud or something darker. Whoever had been out there was close enough to snag their clothing on a branch right by my camp. By now, I wanted to leave, but it wasn't that simple. The hike back to my truck was long, and I didn't want to risk getting lost trying to find the way in a panic. I decided I'd pack up in the morning and leave first thing. For now, I just have to make it through one more night. That final night was the worst of my life. I built the fire high, keeping it burning as long as I could. The forest around me felt heavier than ever, like it was holding its breath. Every sound echoed. Every flicker of light made my nerves jump. I sat beside the fire until my eyes started to sting from the smoke. Around midnight, I finally crawled into the tent, still fully dressed, my rifle beside me. It must have been an hour later when I heard the first sound. A low scrape, like something brushing against fabric. Then came footsteps again, slow and steady. They circled the tent, staying just out of sight. I could hear them clearly this time. Someone was walking around me, not rushing, not hiding, just pacing in a slow, deliberate way. Then, something touched the side of my tent. A faint press, like a hand pushing the fabric just enough to make it bend inward. I froze. The touch stayed there for a moment, then slowly slid away. My mouth went dry. I couldn't move. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe minutes, maybe longer. At some point, I decided I couldn't just sit there anymore. I grabbed the rifle, unzipped the tent halfway, and shoved my flashlight out. The beam hit nothing but trees and smoke. The night was silent again. I stayed up until dawn, shaking from cold and fear. When daylight came, I packed as fast as I could. My hands were trembling. I didn't even eat. I threw everything into my bag and started walking back toward where I'd left my truck. The forest felt different in daylight, open, exposed, but I could still feel eyes on me. Every sound behind me made me turn around. Once, I thought I saw movement far back between the trees, a dark figure just standing still. But when I blinked, it was gone. It took me nearly 3 hours to reach the spot where I'd parked. When I got there, the first thing I noticed was that my truck door was open. I had locked it before leaving. I knew I had. Inside, everything was there. My extra gas can, food wrappers, my map, but something was off. The driver's seat was moved back, as if someone taller had sat there. On the ground outside the door, there were footprints, the same kind I'd seen near my camp. I started the engine without thinking twice. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the keys. I drove until I reached the main road, not stopping once. I didn't even look in the rearview mirror. When I finally got home, I sat in the driveway for a long time, just listening to the quiet hum of the engine. That silence I'd gone looking for, I never wanted to hear it again. For days after, I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints, that feeling of being watched. I kept replaying the nights in my head, the sounds, the soft touch on the tent wall. Whoever had been out there wasn't lost. They weren't just passing through. They had been watching. I checked online later for any reports of people camping or missing near that area. There was nothing. No hikers, no hunters, no signs of anyone. Just a stretch of old forest and a logging road that led to nowhere. I still have that torn piece of fabric. I found it in my bag after unpacking. I don't remember putting it there. It's folded up inside a drawer now. I don't like touching it. I never went camping alone again after that. Every time I think about it, I can still hear the slow crunch of footsteps circling me in the dark. Patient, deliberate, like whoever was out there was waiting for something that never happened. And the worst part is knowing that I never saw their face. I don't know who they were, or why they followed me, or how long they'd been there before I even noticed. Maybe they had been watching since the first day, hidden in the trees, waiting until I was too far from everything to call for help. That thought stays with me more than anything else. Not the fear, not the footsteps, not the open truck door. Just the simple, quiet truth that someone had been out there, close enough to touch my tent, close enough to breathe the same air, and I never even knew they existed until it was almost too late. Sometimes, late at night, when I wake up and the house is completely still, I swear I can hear the same soft sound of footsteps outside the window. Slow, even careful, like someone remembering how it felt to walk circles around my tent under the dark trees of that forgotten forest.